Proceed to give us the layout of the session, and I would just like to once again issue a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much. Dr. Ruth, please take over.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I hope that I am audible, and I hope that somebody may share our slides so that we can take it over from there. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the slides. Yeah.
Yeah, we can
Ruth,
see your screen.
I'm sharing. Can you see? Okay, sure.
Yes, I can see just. Oh, thank you. Thank you, people. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you on behalf of African Center for Technology Studies, that is ACT. And for the last 3 months, we have been charged as the ARA Regional Advocacy Lead for Africa, especially when it comes to climate finance and advocacy. So we are here to present to you what we have done, and what we bring to you is African voices on climate adaptation policies and challenges. So welcome so much as we move to the next slide. Our session objectives are as shown or as displayed in the screen. We hope to disseminate the key findings that we came across, especially those that are related to climate finance policies in Africa, especially GGA and NCQG. And we also want we hope that by the end of this session, we'll be able to collect your insights from this engagement so that we can enhance African influence, especially on global finance policies. We also wish to engage you in refining these advocacy approaches that we have come up with, and as well as recommendations as we gear up for the COP30, which is happening this year. Next slide. Next slide. So I'd like to just give you a snapshot of what we have done as African Center for Technology Studies and as the lead, the regional lead under the ARA initiative, and as far as climate finance policies is concerned. So what we did, we conducted a research using a transdisciplinary approach that we collected findings, observation, and situations from various people, and we enabled a participative approach whereby all the stakeholders that were identified during the studies were involved when it comes to climate finance policies in terms of how they access policies, what are their priorities. And this was done through webinars, through virtual cafes, and also through physical workshops. So we focus so much on climate finance governance in Africa at the backdrop of the climate risks that are encountered in Africa. And we also looked at the vulnerable populations because of the understanding that despite the climate changes, some people are more vulnerable than others despite having all being Africa. And also we looked at adaptation priorities. What are our priorities as Africa? Do we really look at what is most disturbing to us? And also we also looked at the bottlenecks. Let's go to the next slide, Nora. So this was done through mapping the climatic risks that are in Africa. We looked at a number of climate risks and in different places in Africa. And we also interrogated the local adaptation responses. What are people doing about these risks? We also looked at the African position when it comes to the GGA framework. We analyzed the climate finances, especially in terms of sources. Where do we get this? For us to adapt to climate risks, we need to acquire these finances. How do we as Africa source for these finances? Also, we looked at the accessibilities and the bottlenecks that really affect Africa when it comes to access of climate finance. We also looked at what we are having approaches to climate finance, and we also came up with recommendations on how we are going to come together and advocate for climate finance for Africa ahead of COP30. So at this juncture, I want to introduce my colleague, Dr. Eric, to come through this framework. Welcome, Eric. Next slide. Eric, are you there?
Hello. Oh, I was actually speaking, but I was muted. Thank you for prompting me. I was just thanking the colleagues at ICCCAD for giving us an opportunity to share some of our work, which we've been doing for the last few months, and which is very much in line with this, theme of locally led adaptation, which is what this conference is about and what we've been talking about for the past few days and tomorrow. So really, I know I might be talking to a lot of researchers here. I recently learned that Gobeshona actually means research. And so I might be preaching to the choir here. But nonetheless, we hope that you pick one or two things about what we've done and what we found out. Great. So I'm not able to see the slide. Do they see the slides now? Is it projected? I'm missing it.
Yes, I have projected them on my side, Eric.
Them.
Are you not able to see?
And
Yeah.
I'm not able to see them for some reason, but that's fine.
Okay.
It's okay. All right.
Let me stop
Great.
share and share again.
Okay. Maybe I'm the one missing it. Great. So I think this report is basically now I could see them. Thank you very much. It's a synthesis report from just a series of activities that we've been doing the past few months. We've been engaging different people. We've been engaging. We've had about 10 engagements or so, talking to various actors, technical experts in government, community climate actors, people in academia, people in the policy space. And we've been basically asking them, to let them into their world, for them to take us on a journey of how they, perceive, explain, attribute issues to do with adaptation and adaptation finance. And so, and to ask them to really reflect later on how that measures up to perspectives and counter perspectives that are out there. And because we are researchers, the knowledges that are also out there. And I'd really like, and the report is structured this way. We have a summary. We set a bit of the context. We explain a bit about how we came to these findings, and then we go into the findings and offer some discussion and recommendations. So I'd just like to start by setting a bit of context to perhaps people who might not be very deeply involved in adaptation, but I believe we all are. But I just want to, in the next slide, talk about why this emphasis on adaptation for Africa. Well, obviously, because we are the least polluting continent. It's a pretty fundamental fact. It's not an area of great dispute. So adaptation is about, for us, is about restoring agency to communities who have suffered climate change effects. And so for us, adaptation means survival, and we feel that it should be at the forefront of our development agenda. Recent studies estimate damage from climate change globally, from farming to infrastructure and productivity and health, that this damage would cost $38 trillion per year by 2050. And it will see a 90% reduction of income. And especially if you're looking at Africa, we fare the worst globally, with some countries facing up to 30% reduction in income by 2049. These are according to a recent study by COTS. Of course, in Africa, we have had significant weather events. Just last 2023, we've had floods, we've had prolonged droughts, we had extreme heat waves in South Sudan. So I'm sure people at ICCCAD would relate to this. And of course, we've also had a significant conflict within the continent. In Sudan, Eastern DRC, we have a bit of coups in west of Africa, and terrorism in northeast Nigeria, and so on. And what we see is that, and in fact, these are the ones that we know of. I mean, there are other smaller things that don't really make it to the media or the main agenda. But the thing is, this thread, each thread feeds into each other and compound this effects that this difficulty that we face. And so, hence our emphasis on adaptation. Next slide, please. And the next slide, please. Okay. I just like to take a moment to talk about the financing need, to talk about this global goal on adaptation, which really has been in the works for the past at least a decade since it was formally launched. And there have been a couple of processes which you might be aware of: the GLASS work program. Then later on, parties adopted the UAE framework for global climate resilience. And at present, we have the UAE Belém work program, which is looking at indicators for adaptation. And we hope by the end of the year or by COP, they'll be able to conclude their work. Next slide, please. In terms of financing, adaptation financing, well, globally, according to estimates from the IPCC, they estimate that annually we'll need climate finance within the region of 5 to 12 trillion until 2050. In the developing world, that means emerging markets and developing markets alone, excluding China, we need up to 2.4 trillion annually by 2030 for climate and nature-related investments. This is separate from the $3 trillion USD that we need to work on the SDGs. If we zoom in a bit further, in Africa, we need about 2.8 trillion between 2020 and 2030 to implement our NDCs. These according to the Climate Policy Initiative. And this is based on current figures, which is still not sufficient. As if, of course, this financing needs evolve and can only become greater. So you'll not be surprised to hear that climate finance needs of Africa are severely underfunded. And Africa needs climate flows must at least quadruple annually until 2030 to meet the investment needs that we have, and the financing need that we have to implement the SDGs. So I like sharing. Next slide, please. I just like to depict this in a pictorial. If you look at this, you'll see here that what you have there, we have needs for different regions. What you see in the brown is the needs, and what you see in green is, dark green rather, is no, light green is the flows that we have. So you can already start to imagine that we have a long way to go in terms of finance. Another next page, please. I can't see the slides again. Next slide, please. So the second diagram I'd like to show is just basically to show that international climate finance flows within Africa remain heavily concentrated in a small number of African countries, with the top 10 countries receive up to 46% of the total funding, while the most vulnerable in Africa receive only about 11% of the financing, which of course is severe underfunding. So these disparities are even more pronounced when you look at private investments. So there's a bit of issues with distribution of finance, and this is something we should look into, and our conversation should really highlight. And very quickly, in the next few minutes, go over the key findings from our different engagements. I must say at this point that we engage people through at least 2 in-person forums. We had a very long 3-day symposium just last month, and we had a series of webinars, and we conducted a rapid study, and like a situational analysis as well of the current situation in adaptation and adaptation finance. Nora, could you project the slides again? Maybe they got lost, I'm not sure. The first finding, the first issue that I would like to highlight is this emphasis that African stakeholders had on transparency, accountability, and accessibility of climate funds. African stakeholders pointed out that there's inadequate commitment to the NCQG from developed countries. Then the requirements, for the coming years will be much greater than what we need now, and therefore there needs to be the NCQG ought to have been more ambitious, yet realistic, to balance the financial capacities of developing countries with the urgent needs of developing countries, while at the same time, fostering some robust monitoring and accountability mechanisms. So we feel that we are yet to get there in terms of holding contributors to account. And I say this in full appreciation that finance is a real friction point. But considering the significant gap that I've just highlighted, then the NCQG must really be seen as an undesirable outcome for Africa. So as African stakeholders also point out the need for an established framework for transparency and accountability, not just in terms of emissions, but also in terms of finance. There's this persistent gap between what's promised and what's actually disbursed. And, with African countries, of course, facing delays and restrictive conditions and limited access to funds, despite growing commitments from developing countries. So these challenges range from, complex application processes, stringent eligibility criteria, and preference for loan-based mechanisms over direct grants, which of course talks to this thing that we've now started hearing, climate debt, Additionally, we had concerns raised about the growing influence of private sector-driven climate finance, which of course prioritizes profit, and of course really looks at, aside from profits, really, prefers mitigation projects, which, as I mentioned, for Africa is not a significant issue because we are not heavy polluters at all. So for us, if we need private sector financing, we need it to be more skewed towards adaptation. Of course, there are bureaucratic hurdles and stringent, donor-driven conditions, which also identified, which prevents African nations from effectively utilizing climate finance. I must say at this point, African stakeholders pointed out a number of new, this need for a renewed thinking about climate finance to plug in the gaps that we currently face. And they pointed out instruments like, impact-linked finance, where, it's impact first, not profit, seek ye impact first, and all other things will follow, I suppose. And then we have this, blended finance combines, private and public finance, which is useful tool to de-risk climate investments and make it more attractive to often institutional investors, not your mom and dad sort of investors. There's also an emphasis on bonds, green sustainability, social bonds, and here it was noted that government-backed or sovereign green bonds could help catalyze a domestic green bond market in Africa and spur private sector investment in this area. Of course, carbon trading, carbon taxes also pointed out, and also catalytic capital, patient, risk-tolerant capital, which can anticipate below market returns. This was also pointed out. Just yesterday, I heard on the news that Kenya was considering this debt food security swap, where the creditor agrees to forgo some outstanding payments on a commitment by the country that the resources that they'll free up from paying the debt will go towards bolstering food security initiatives. There was something like this pointed out by stakeholders that there could be something like like a debt for climate swap sort of arrangement, where a portion of a country's external debt is forgiven in exchange for investments in climate adaptation and mitigation projects. So these are some of the instruments that are pointed out. Next slide, please. Another issue that has been pointed out and in literature and by stakeholders is, of course, this capacity and institutional framework to absorb, utilize climate finance. It's been said that part of the reasons that we don't access this finance as effectively as desired is that we have some inherent issues, in terms of our policy framework, institutional framework. Perhaps some countries don't have like an anti-corruption sort of framework, institution, and structure. And so this finding basically highlights that we need to, African countries rather, need to really establish this robust framework. But I must say at this point that, many African countries have taken steps in this regard. So if you look at the NDC registry, you'll see that 48 African countries have submitted their enhanced, their second and enhanced NDCs, where they commit, targets for adaptation and mitigation. And actually only one country hadn't submitted, which is Libya. And a further 6 countries in Africa have enacted, climate change laws, including Kenya, Benin, Nigeria, Uganda, Mauritius, and South Africa, which of course is a very encouraging trend. In Kenya, in particular, if I could mention, we have this Climate Change Act, which was recently amended to make provision for regulation of carbon markets. And this Climate Change Act has also been cascaded down to the subnational level, what we call counties here. And we have 47 of these, and almost every one of these have a climate change act. So this institutional and policy framework is improving. African stakeholders also pointed out the importance of leveraging regional and continental bodies such as regional development banks, which often feature as accredited entities for this multilateral climate finance, and specialized institutions like the African Risk Capacity Group. And basically, the idea here is that they can be used to decentralize finance, because usually a key concern is that finance remains centralized up there, whereas people in the front line, people in the community who really feel these immediate impacts of climate change do not get to be involved in how this money is used or get their projects funded. So next slide, please. Right. In terms of the global goal on adaptation, there's this emphasis on robust local adaptation indicators and robust monitoring framework, which is very much connected to what is happening on the ground, not something very outlandish that we do not understand. So the emphasis here is to have situationally appropriate indicators of the crisis, of the climate change crisis, and the views of people, those on the front line of the climate crisis. That means us, who have immediate and intimate knowledge of the realities of climate change. We want to avoid a situation where externally imposed adaptation metrics, are given to us, and which really don't reflect our realities, and we don't really relate to. And so Africans need to take a bit more ownership of the indicators that are coming out of the GGA, the UAE Berlin process, so that we can ensure transparency and accountability in terms of monitoring adaptation. And we can even use these adaptation indicators to now present ourselves better in terms of accessing climate finance. Next slide, please. In terms of, I must say before I move on that Africans are very clear about we're very clear about our adaptation priorities. We're very clear about those that shouldn't be. It's not something that it can be given to us. We live this reality, and we know what we need to prioritize. And that's why we have a lot of countries, of course, having submitted their national adaptation plans. That should be a good indication that we know what we need to prioritize. We know what affects us. We wear the shoe, so we know how the shoe fits and where it pinches. Right. So the other theme that was emerging out of our discussions was this idea of aligning efforts of the different stakeholders. This is one of there's this misconception that climate finance perhaps is a government, it should be like a government responsibility. It's really the responsibility of all of us. In various group discussions, stakeholders highlighted the different roles in terms of adaptation and what they see as the role of others. So, for example, for the national, subnational, and local governments, there's this idea that they played a critical role in defining and setting adaptation priorities at their various levels, given that they are more in touch with the local realities. These structures are, of course, very critical in distributing climate finance. We had a speaker at one point from a program that we have here in Kenya called FLOCA, Financing Locally Led Climate Action, and who basically talked about how it's helping to decentralize adaptation finance at the lowest governance level, at the ward level, through what we call county climate change funds. So the national governments, of course, also could stimulate private sector investment through things like tax exemptions, and reducing particularly taxation on technology. That was particularly pointed out as a promising way of lowering and encouraging adoption of climate smart technologies. A good number of our participants in these different sessions were drawn from the civil society and different NGOs, and we had very many actually community climate change actors. And they saw their role as critical in two main ways. The first was, of course, in awareness creation at the lowest level, and also informing stakeholders about opportunities and mechanisms for programming. The second role that they feel they played was in advocacy and lobbying for policies and reforms to help in climate adaptation efforts. Because since you're talking about issues of justice, it's critical that the importance of civil society members be heard in active policy discussions that are currently occurring. I always see, activists at COP. So we recognize their role, and I think their role is particularly important. Of course, academia has a critical role in pioneering research and climate smart technologies. And the private sector also has an important role in innovation. Of course, now for the private sector, we need the right policy and regulatory environment for private actors to operate. So I see this as a situation where the whole is larger than the sum of the sum total of the parts. So there's really a need for harnessing a multi-level, multi-sectoral collaboration and alignment so that you can avoid, say, duplicating or funding low-impact projects, for example. And we also need to be systematic about anchoring our work in regional agendas, global agendas, and seizing all available policy windows that present themselves where, donors, private sector, government can coalesce around an issue. We need to take advantage of this sort of issues. Next slide, please. Right. So, yeah, this at the closing leg of our engagement with different African stakeholders, this theme really came up that multilateralism, global cooperation is really under threat. African stakeholders expressed their concerns about a number of recent political developments. Prominent among them, the US pulling out of the Paris Agreement, for the second time. And the US, of course, has historically stood as the world's largest economy and greenhouse gas emitter. And, there's this refusal by their president to contribute to climate finance from public finances. And this was particularly symbolic coming on the first day of his administration. And so, of course, it left no doubt where he stood on this climate change discussion. Unfortunately, this is familiar play. It's the same situation in Kyoto Protocol. Remember, it wasn't ratified, and they later pulled out of the protocol. So we see the developing world as embarking in this populist, economy fast path, and so which is for us very unfortunate. We can all appreciate that America has a lot of soft power, and so it was not outside the realm of possibility that others would follow in this trend. So, of course, other developed nations have followed suit, imposing significant abrupt aid cuts to Africa. An example is Netherlands. I think about a month or two ago, they released this policy letter where they say that they are planning to cut spending on international development by up to 2.4 billion euro in order to focus on other areas that are directly beneficial to Netherlands, quote unquote. which is namely trade, migration, and security. Likewise, the United Kingdom will cut spending from 0.5% to 0.3% of gross national income by 2027, ostensibly to raise funds for defense spending. It is in evidence that this kind of development aid has been critical to adaptation, to exactly the conversation we're having today. And therefore, this abrupt move is a tremendous loss for Africa, and it seeks to pose a contradiction between the commitments to the Paris Agreement and, the politics of the day. What African stakeholders find sinister about this move is the viewing of climate finance as a token of reward, which is inconsistent with this notion of climate justice. That climate finance can be used to strong developing nations. So this is a problematic perspective, and in the view of African stakeholders, it's a reenacting of colonial relations through climate finance. Of course, we've seen this sort of tactics with trade negotiations. Africans here would, relate with the AGOA treaty. So we can see this sort of move being transplanted in this climate change discourse, which is unfortunate. For example, the Netherlands, has made clear plans to exit from regional climate funds, from that policy paper that I spoke of, and to hold funding for small-scale renewable energy projects. And even more sinister is the US pulling out of the International Partners Group and withdrawing over $1 billion, which is pledged for investment for South Africa's transition from a phase out of coal to renewable energy. And so we note that this is completely about separate issues. It's because of, they say this themselves, it's because of the courts, the Israel courts, the ICJ, and this Land Expropriation Act, which I think, in my view, somebody who's lived there for some time, it's a misinterpretation of the act altogether. As Africa grapples with these new developments, we welcome the enlisting of China, an emerging economy, as a climate finance contributor. This is, of course, in recognition to their significant role in emissions of greenhouse gases, because they are the largest manufacturing concern in the world, really. And of course, they ban, about 50% of the world's domestic coal locally. So that was a win, at least, that came out of COP29. Next slide, please. I think if we reflect forward towards COP30, I think there are a few things we can say, and as I conclude, that there's need for good faith and a recommitment to the Paris Agreement by developing nations in terms of upholding multilateralism. This system of solidarity and mutual obligation, which is a key principle around which the world have attempted to forge climate action, should really be upheld. The changing global politics, which threaten to frustrate the Paris Agreement, should not be strongly deterred. Should not only be strongly deterred because it may lead to a number of outcomes. So, as I mentioned earlier, other developing nations may hide behind the US, by joining them in refusing to contribute to climate finance, or even completely pulling out of the agreement as they did. And of course, the effect would be a rolling back of the gains we've made so far, and an exposing of Africans to new vulnerabilities and amplifying existing ones. The position that African stakeholders have as we head to COP30, therefore, is that we cannot let the US and other developing nations off the hook that easy. And there's we urge the need for a movement in the US and other developing nations who will call out such attempts to frustrate the Paris Agreement by highlighting the historical role that they have played in creating the present circumstances. of course, what came out strongly also in our, and even reflecting forward, is this need for predictable grant-based financing, which does not push African nations further into debt, the so-called climate debt. At the present date, climate, climate change is being, climate finance is being advanced in form of loans, in fact, at market rates. So that is really unfortunate for us, because our public finances, we have a significant development backlog, and our public finances should really be focused on doing other things like healthcare, food security, and so on. So we really need, and speaking of justice, we really need the developing nations to play their part. And of course, there are reports that clearly show that some developing nations are not paying their fair share. So there's need to have that transparency, accountability come into perspective here. African nations also need to increase their fiscal space to absorb climate finance and allow for operation of green financing instruments. So discussions around initiatives such as East African Alliance or Club Carbon Markets, climate finance, this discussion around the Africa Climate Change Fund, are things that should be encouraged going forward. But also, speaking of that, there needs to be some systematic reform that is necessary in a number of areas, and in one particular area in the global finance architecture, which has long privileged developing nations. So discussions around the NCQG should really be able to reshape climate finance mechanisms to be more predictable, accessible, equitable, so that we can make progress on this goal. So, for example, if we are talking about, I can just think of an example of debts, the climate debt. Right now we have to depend on Moody's or S&P or Fitch to rate us, and of course we don't have very favorable ratings. And so there's this whole conversation about an African credit rating agency. So because of course I feel that they don't take full account of the contextual dynamics, which these international credit rating agencies do not seem to grasp very well. So changes like this is what we, systematic changes like this is what we are really advocating for, African stakeholders are advocating for. But we take comfort in the work of the Africa Group of Negotiators. We can understand the chaotic nature of political decision making. You need to negotiate in good faith, but also not be obstructive. And so strengthening efforts in terms of negotiations will ensure that COP move from being a mere tick box exercise annually to forums that we can really drive real measurable change and hold developing countries accountable. In conclusion, I must say that we can't secure our own microclimate in the world. It doesn't matter which region you are in. So we need to really work together, and there's space for that. And that's what COPs and other forums are for. And so there are really challenges ahead. A number of developing countries still believe it's existential for them to continue to emit greenhouse gases to achieve this growth imperative and compete in the global economy to the detriment of the global south. And this for us is unfortunate. As we navigate, of course, these choppy political waters, it is critical for us to continue engaging in dialogues and to ensure that these dialogues are progressive, that we need to point out issues and propose solutions and ensure that the solutions are inclusive, whereby community voices, especially with regard to adaptation, are heard in these spaces and not taken for granted. So I hope that has stimulated us a bit to have some productive engagements in the next few minutes. Thank you for giving me audience. I'd like to hand over to Ruth. Thank you. Ruth, please.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for the very in-depth insights about what we discovered and calling the group into coming together to really focus on our negotiation as Africa ahead of COP30. It is true, they take the developed countries, they take climate finance for Africa more as a reward as opposed to a responsibility. It is time to stand up against this viewpoint and let them pay or let them provide finances for taking responsibility of their contribution to the climate change and the effects that are encountered in Africa. So with this, I'm sure that all of us have had our own insight was about and what has been found out. Eric, let this juncture, I want to introduce my colleague, Joan, to take us through our chance to Joan, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Ruth. I think we lost you for a bit, but you're back. Yes, thank you, Dr. Ruth. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Andega from the Africa Center for Technology Studies. Now that we've heard the key themes, findings, and recommendations, we'd love to hear directly from you, the participants, about your own experiences. So through a short, can I get the next slide, please, Nora? Through a short Mentimeter activity, we invite you to share your real-world reflections on climate adaptation and access to climate finance across the different countries. And we're curious, have you seen successes? Are there challenges that you may be facing? How has financing or the lack of it impacted adaptation efforts in your context? So if you could please scan the QR code on your screen. I will also post a link to the Mentimeter in the chat. Kindly let me know if this is visible.
Yes, we see it. We see the.
It's visible, John.
Thank you. I'm posting a link as well in the chat. Yes, so you can go ahead and answer the question presented to you. I'm gonna give everyone a few minutes for each question. And then we can look through the responses as well. Okay, so the first question is, have you, or maybe I should actually share this screen so that we can look at the answers as they're coming in together. So the first question is, have you, your community, or your organization ever successfully accessed international climate finance? So we can see the responses are coming in. 80% say yes. 20% say no. I'm curious, for those who said yes, could you give more context? Maybe was this for a project? Was it easy to access? But for now, I think we have all our responses. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So the next slide, if you stay on the same link or on the same screen, you have the next Mentimeter question, which is which challenge most urgently needs to be addressed to improve climate finance access? So you can go ahead and select the different options. We'd love to know your thoughts, where your minds are at, what you're thinking, or what your experiences have been. Okay, so I can see there's still some responses pouring in. So to answer this question, which challenge most urgently needs to be addressed in order to improve climate finance access? 80% of participants chose complicated application processes or requirements. And I think Dr. Eric spoke a little bit about that during his presentation. We also have 20% choosing lack of local institutional capacity to manage funds. And there were no votes for insufficient direct funding, delays in bureaucracy in dispersing funds, and lack of transparency and accountability. So on to the last question. And for this one, I really want us to think, what one change would make climate finance more accessible and impactful, particularly to in your own communities at a local level? What one change do you think would make climate finance more accessible and impactful? So I'll give everyone a few minutes to answer. Okay, we have our first response coming in. The one change that this participant thinks would make climate finance more accessible and impactful is a more friendly funding landscape, that is one that is geared towards local actors. And by this, they mean simpler application processes, as we saw in the previous Mentimeter as well, better organization support, flexible funds, etc. That's quite a good response. Thank you for that. I know people are typing. I'll give you a few 2 more minutes. I see we have more technical support for local communities at the proposal stage. That is a great one. So basically what is coming out from these responses is support, technical support. I see there was also organizational support, fewer intermediaries in the funding pipeline. Okay. A collective voice by Africa in climate finance advocacy in international platforms. Also, improved climate governance structures for the finances at hand. Another response we are getting is simplify the application process and more engagement for youth. We're also getting collective support, We're getting at grassroots level. We need partnership in financing. A lot of the available funding is done through sub-granting, which reduces the impact of initiatives. More networking built into proposal stages, allowing communities time to organize better. And yes, I think those are all the responses we're getting today. Thank you so much for participating in this session. I will hand us back to Dr. Ruth to introduce the next session, but we can remain on the Mentimeter. Sorry, I'll just stop sharing.
Nora, you can continue sharing our slides. Next slide. And as she moves to the next slides, I would like to thank the participants for giving you a very honest view of climate finance view from an African perspective, like what should be done. And at the backdrop of the report that has been read by Eric. So at this particular juncture, I would like to invite questions. You can just raise your hand and ask a question, or you can go to our chat box and post your question there for an answer. I'll give a few minutes to pick your questions. I don't see any hand up yet. Yes, Saqib, kindly ask your question.
Hi there. I hope I'm on. So my name is Saqib Haq. I'm from the International Center for Climate Change and Development, ICCCAD, New York, the conference. And I just wanted to thank all the panelists and the presenters for an excellent session. I think it was really, really good to have that broken down into all the challenges that you specified, specifically in the Mentimeter. I think we got some really good feedback from that. As a learning from the conference, this is really something that we'd like to challenge in what are the paradigms that have existed in the development and climate sector and how we might be able to change it, hearing from local organizations, particularly what have been the challenges that they have listed. So I just wanted to maybe not as a comment, list that in the Menti slide that you had, the second one, in being able to highlight the most urgent. I recognize the question is about the most urgent, but really it's a blend of all of the options that you had. I mean, it starts with, you know, having a bit more direct access to funding, having a little bit more support for organizations to manage funds, to be able to receive funding and disperse them. But it really does kick off from the application. If I, as a local organization, am not able to apply for the fund in the first place, and it doesn't matter whether the fund is sufficient or insufficient, I'm not getting it. So then again, it's more of a continuum of really looking at the funding landscape from all the different stopgaps that have been causing challenges for local organizations. And I think a number of the elements that you've highlighted there are very, very critical elements that local organizations would resonate with. So thank you again for a very, very discussion. And I hope you get a bit more of a fruitful Q&A coming through. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saqib. Yeah, it's true that most all the people have given their priority answers, but all of them, they really come into play. Any other person who has a question or a comment? Does silence mean contentment?
Ruth, I can see a question
Okay.
at the Q&A tab. Just next to the share button, there's the Q&A.
Yeah. In terms of the finances available, what percentage is available, adaptation and mitigation, and how can we measure adaptation and push for more adaptation finance? Eric, you'd like to give a view into this?
Yeah, so it's different. It's different for different it's different for different funds. So the World Bank, I was in a webinar the other day, they say that the ones who are the largest funder for adaptation. I'm yet to check the figures, but really this parity issue between adaptation and mitigation is really something that comes up every time we talk about what should be coming to Africa. And so it's a very pertinent and important area of discussion. So that varies from fund to fund. I know the GEF, so for example, say it's their goal to fund 50-50, and so on. So really more what we should be pushing for is more funds to be towards adaptation. And so the conversation as we are going forward, whether it's bilateral funds or the multilateral funds, should really go towards adaptation. We are happy that there's a specific fund for adaptation, the Adaptation Fund, and the Loss and Damage Fund, which they're still fine-tuning the access modalities. We hope that what comes out of there's in fact a discussion paper already out for the Loss and Damage Fund. It talks about about I think two or three access windows. There's an event-based direct access, and there's one that talked about program-based direct access. So and then also there's a rapid disbursement window. These are just proposals. So we hope that what comes out of the Loss and Damage Fund, which is still very new, will really prioritize that. What I should point out is that the Adaptation Fund is good in that there's this country allocation, which makes it a bit more predictable, which is a good thing because if you can predict, you can put it in your budget, right? It's not as Sakib said, if you are not accredited, then you can't even apply. So, but the thing is, if you have, say, a ministry that's accredited, and then that could be put in the budget, and that's a bit more predictable. I think the second leg of that question was how can we measure adaptation? Yeah, so we hope that comes out better in the GGA work. So we are yet to see, but what is important now is for us to continue engaging in their workshops and engaging them and taking ownership of what we see as could be credible adaptation indicators, because what gets measured gets done, I suppose. I think that's what they say. So and we hope that this adaptation will not be just for the sake, that we'll be able to use adaptation. You see, mitigation, it's easier to measure, and so people like it, and they're able to fund it. But adaptation is much less so. It's very hard to measure because so if you're talking about, say, climate smart agriculture, the indicators there could be, a whole range. It's not very clear cut as mitigation is. So we hope that what the indicators that will come out will enable us to measure a bit more robustly and be able to access more finance for climate. I hope I've answered that a bit.
Thank you, Eric,
I don't know if this.
for your answer.
I see there's a question also
Thank you
about
for your answer
geopolitical
on that.
context.
And
Yeah.
I have seen, yeah, there's another question. You spoke about geopolitical context as we approach COP30. How and what key lessons in your advocacy efforts can we prioritize that speaks to a collective African voice, and what can we do to strengthen our collective efforts?
Yeah. I think I remember this from
Eric?
yeah. So in response to this, I remember there was a comment. I think what has come directly to my mind immediately was a comment that was made in one of the symposiums we had. Um, in, and there was this talk about we should cooperate, not compete, you know. So there's this need for a collective voice. And so in that regard, I think we should empower the Africa group of negotiators more. We should empower them more. Uh, and whether it's through creating some institution about uh, that they need to use to to canvass our issues better or and so on. So we need to empower them a bit more and collaborate more. Because like I said, the more we cooperate, it's one of those things where we need to work together. You know, the whole is greater than the sum total of the parts. Uh, in my mind, I think it's about empowering the negotiators that go out there who actually sit on these tables, who are able to voice out our issues better. And they're very competent people in that panel. So that's what comes to mind. But again, these are new developments, and the political happenings are new developments, and we hope that through putting our views out there that something will shift. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for your answer on that. I don't see any other question. I don't see any hand up. And again, I invite, see there's another question has come in. How can we better document local adaptation efforts to speak for the continent? How can we better document local adaptation efforts to speak for the continent? Another question over there, Eric.
Yeah, in terms of documenting, you see, documenting, I think for us, it's for you to document. I think what comes before documenting is really measuring this. We can document something on climate smart agriculture or clean cooking. I mean, that's okay. It's a good story. There are lots of lessons that people can learn from that. But I think it's important. It's more important, in my view, to not just document. I mean, we've been doing this. It's not the first time we've been asked. We've had quite quite a number of projects where we've documented what we've been doing. But what we have not been doing, and collectively, not just as an organization, but in different parts of the world, is that we've not been measuring adaptation robustly. And that's why this UAE Belém work program talks about these indicators. I'm struggling to remember, but their previous work came up with some 11 indicators. There were four on adaptation, and there were some 7 adaptation based on thematic areas. There was one on infrastructure, sanitation, and so on. So the more we measure, the better for us. Documenting, I think we have been doing to some extent. But I think what we need to do now is say, we have this clean cooking stove project, and it helped X number of women, reduce on their energy consumption, or has driven better nutritional outcomes. Something a bit more measurable, so that the private sector, whoever is funding, can look at this and say, yeah, this is good. The reason I suspect issues around carbon trading has been gaining a lot of traction is that you're able to measure how much you're emitting. It's a complicated science, but ultimately you're able to say model or estimate how much of CO2 you're sequestering, or you're preventing from being released to the atmosphere. And so I think the focus for me, I'd like just to shift the question a bit. The focus is not shouldn't be on documenting, but rather measuring then documenting. That's how I'd look at that.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Eric.
I
Thank
see,
you for that. You're not done?
Sorry, please go ahead, Ruth. Sorry.
Thank you for that answer. And to add on to that, I also feel that Africa, we should come together as a voice. And when we establish a point of togetherness where we are supposed to discuss our adaptation efforts together, it's only then that we increase our collective bargaining. So again, I look at another question that talks about Kenyan government has a great story of frameworks to support subnational and local climate adaptation efforts. How can this be replicated across the region? Before I allow Eric to also give a view on this, maybe I can also try to give an answer as far as this is concerned, because I can see it focuses on some of the efforts that we have, like FLOCA. I believe that one of the things we need to do is to take care of the bottlenecks that are coming in the FLOCA.
I'm sorry, Ruth. Ruth, you are losing you. Okay. I'm sorry, Ruth, we lost you a bit there.
Once we to start
Hi, Dr. Ruth. We've lost you.
which the bottlenecks,
Hello, Dr.
about
Ruth.
the climate governance,
Okay.
then we shall be able to replicate that to other regions. I feel that I'm not audible. Okay. And now,
No,
am I
we
audible?
lost you. We lost you significantly. You are audible, but we lost you. We
I'm
didn't
now
quite hear.
audible. Audible. What about now?
We can hear you, Ruth. We can hear you, Ruth. Let me
Oh,
take let me take let me have a take on this question around sort of transferring what we have learned in Kenya around frameworks at the national and subnational levels to much of the region. Before even you do that, I must say that, questions of policies and questions of adaptation are really context driven. There's no, we cannot say transfer an adaptation plan for Namibia, which is a water scarce country, to I don't know, Kenya or Uganda, which receives fairly good rainfall. And so we should be careful around sort of transferring some of these lessons. But of course, there are things we can pick out. And for example, in our FLOCA program, the financing locally led adaptation efforts, the things we've learned through implementing that program as a country over the last 5 years. We've learned that, you need to have policies that cascaded down. You need to have structures and resource people. You need to build capacities of counties or subnational governing structures and so on. And that you need some feedback loop that you're able to understand adaptations because adaptation needs, of course, evolve. What you're struggling with yesterday is not what you might be struggling with next year. And so there are those sort of learnings we could pick from programs that we've learned in Kenya. But I'll just be cautious to transfer everything to everywhere. We all have different things we're struggling with. I see another question on innovating financing and on green bonds and carbon markets, and how this can be accessible to grassroots initiative. Yeah, these emerging financing instruments are good, and it's a way in which we can pick up the slack from the developing world in terms of what we need for climate finance. Green bonds has been around for at least 15 years, and it's reached the 1 trillion USD mark, I think beyond that by now. And so, and if you look at a country like Kenya, we only have one green bond listed, the Acon bond, and a lot of the bonds are either mostly in South Africa and Morocco, I believe. Very few countries also in Kenya, in Africa, have a sovereign green bond, and in some cases, it's failed to spur a very robust domestic green bond market. Nigeria, for example, so the things we know about green bonds, we know that it needs to attract foreign investors. I had a paper out about maybe 4 years ago around developing a green bond market in Kenya. And what I was basically arguing is that, there's this need for foreign investment in our local bond markets. Because even if you look at the vanilla bond markets, we have it's much smaller than the equities market, and very few bonds there really trade. And so if we have foreign interest in our bonds, that might be able to help us gain some traction. The truth really is that it's very prohibitive to list a green bond. That's why you only have one in Kenya. Because the idea is that you need to come up with a project, you need to have the project reviewed. If it's a bond, you have to get it rated, because you need institutional investors, for example, are very, very interested in the rating of your green bond, and so on. And of course, there are all sorts of capital market requirements which we now have. So it's very prohibitive for small projects, small organizations to list this. And I think perhaps what we should really look at is how to make this a little less strenuous for us. On the carbon markets, that's even more complicated. It's a new area. In the carbon markets, you need to demonstrate additionality, which is hectic, and then you have to depend on listings. So for example, in Kenya, we are now an Article 6 market, which means we can trade mitigation units, which is great. I think we are only second after South Africa, if I'm not wrong. I think Ghana was developing theirs. So there it's a very nascent area, and again, quite prohibitive for smaller organizations, community sort of organizations to try and do theirs. So a lot of ground to cover in that area, and but I still believe if we could just press on and do more and engage more, it's something that can be a game changer because there's lots of potential. I mean, in every place that you look at, whether it's the energy market or it's agriculture and so on, there are lots of green projects that one could invest in Kenya. I'd leave it there because of time. Thank you. I'd hand over to Nora to close for us, or Joanne.
Thank you so much, Eric, for that. I hope I'm now audible, and I'm sorry for the mishap. I think I have included my comment in the chat box. So without further ado, and for the interest of time, I wish to invite Nora to help to close down our session, as I take this opportunity to appreciate everyone for the active participation. Nora, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. And I want to extend my gratitude to the team at ICCCAD for allowing us this opportunity to be presenters, share our findings, and also just advance the advocacy efforts that we are doing in Africa. I think for me, the conversations and the interactions and even the questions have highlighted a call to action sort of for us as the regional advocacy lead, and also for the various organizations that are undertaking climate adaptation efforts. And I think one of the greatest lessons from today's session is now the landscape of finance. What landscape are we moving towards? We are moving towards involvement of private sectors. I can echo the words of Eric that it needs collaboration. It is not the responsibility of the government. It is a collective responsibility. And even the questions have shown that there are innovative finances that are accessible to some, and there are others that are accessible to others. So we need a collaboration. We need to speak in one voice as Africa. And most of all, we need to continue to measure our adaptation efforts so that the data can speak for itself. Our efforts can be widely known. And I think one of the aspects that Dr. Ruth was trying to speak to is the case of Kenya. How can we advance these milestones that we are making locally to continue? I think the African Center for Technology Studies has gathered so many lessons interacting with different regions, different countries, and we can speak in a harmonized voice as we go towards Belem, and in fact, in getting these finances to trickle down to the community level, to the county levels that we have in Kenya, and even the subnational levels as we have them in other countries. So I just want to extend my gratitude for your participation. Thank you very much. Continue to interact with us. We still continue these advocacy efforts. We continue to post knowledge products and share our findings and any new information that we get. Right now, we also will be having a sustainability fellowship as part of our Acts Pathway Academy that we host. And here we continue to cascade the learning to researchers so that we can translate these efforts into our communities and into the work that we do. So please go to our website, visit us, reach out to us on social media, and as we continue to interact. And thank you so much. And as we continue the Gobeshona conference, we hope to learn from others as well. And that is my final thank you. I'll hand it over back to the ICCCAD team. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your nice presentation. And as we are heading towards the end of this session, so I would like to request all of the panelists to on your camera so that I can take a group photo, all of you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your nice cooperation and for your
Thank
nice
you.
presentation. See you soon again.
Bye.
Thank you
Okay,
for
bye.
having us.
Thank you very much.
Bye.